Welcome back, and we're getting ready to move into our first segment for today as we check in with what's happening in the Chiquibul. We have with us this morning, representing the Friends for Conservation and Development, Executive Director Raphael Manzanero, and Manager of the Park Rangers and the Chiquibul National Park, Derek Chan. Good morning and welcome, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, thank you.
Now, gentlemen, we take the opportunity to be able to have you in on set to talk about what is happening in the Chiquibul. And we know that there are quite a number of illegal activities that you continue to try to ward off through your park rangers and through educational activities. Let's just do a general update as to some of the threats that continue to be a part of your work within the Chiquibul.
Yeah, good morning. In terms of the threats, as ongoing threats, the gold panning activity is still pretty much one that we would want to highlight more now. Yeah. We would also have a major problem in terms of cattle ranching that also we had already been informing for quite some time now. Yeah. The other issues concerning the chatero activity, the extraction of shatter leaves, illegal logging are pretty much low in scale right now in the Chiquibul. And as a result, also poaching has also been quite low in terms of hunting for wild animals and even the poaching of scarlet macaws. Yeah. Although it still continues on slightly, but it's not really as increased as before. Yeah. So technically at this point, gold panning and cattle ranching are probably the two more urgent matters to discuss in terms of the Chiquibul.
Very quickly, just to look at what has been done to address the other two areas that you say are on the decline. Starting off with the poaching, we know you had some very innovative programs in place. In fact, it was essentially that birds that had nested had gotten their own private security to ensure that the eggs weren't stolen or the hatchlings itself. So let's talk about the specific initiatives that have led to the decline in these areas before we focus on those that are more challenging at the time.
Yeah, I'd say that in terms of the poaching, yes. We had realized that poaching was all extended all throughout the Chiquibul distribution area. As a result of chateros wandering up to 50 kilometers under the jungle in terms of tracks and trails. With the reduction of chatero activity, so that has pretty much been also as a contained issue. We also had really to go about in terms of putting an enforcement program, along the Chaleo Reservoir in terms of monitoring the scarlet macaws. Eventually, that led us, 2 years ago in terms of putting a hand rearing program. Hand rearing was basically done with the major concept or the main concept that those chicks that were going to be stolen, they had a high probability of being, stolen from the nest. We actually went ahead really to remove them from the nest and put them in terms of a laboratory setting. And that has been, highly successful. We have been learning over the last 2 years in terms of really trying to maintain the birds without almost no contact with human beings, so that they be, actually as wild as they can be. Yeah. So today, the poaching elements in terms of scarlet macaws has actually been zero over the last 2 years. Although there have been some attempts, but with the enforcement and also with the hand rearing program, it basically has been contained at this point.
One of the things that fascinates me is your ability to be as resourceful as possible given the vast expanse of the Chiquibul forest and the limited manpower that you guys have. In terms of the idea and the illegal activity of gold panning, I presume that there are various areas in which people come across into Belize and conduct these activities. How have you guys been able to either get a handle of this situation or try to mitigate as much as possible this kind of illegal activity?
I think in terms of the gold panning, we certainly have understood. We have already been able really to map out the routes, the tracks, the way how people operate. So we technically would have the information in terms of trying to intervene and to try to contain it also. However, admittedly enough, even though we have started really from around 2008 and 2010, basically 2011 was really the time when we really saw a movement of more of the gold panners in the area. So the interventions was basically to put in a conservation post.
Yeah.
And that conservation post, it came about by 2012, which is Say with Chico. But we realized that people are able to adapt, and they are very much strategic also on how to conduct the illicit activities. So what really happened after the CP was constructed, basically we diffused the problem. In other words, the people started really to move out from that zone and to more and to move more higher to the mountains in search of course, the gold. Now we have also come about with a whole set of other recommendations. However, you will understand that FCD cannot really function alone in these areas. We have to depend a lot on the other institutions to be able to do the work as effective as possible. Now the Guatemalans, what they have done over the last years is basically to operate only at night. So even though, and this is important, a lot of Belizeans do not really understand that there have been a mining concessionaire in the Chiquibul, and that goes for quite some years. In fact, over the last 40 years, there have been already licenses that have been granted to particular companies to extract the gold in the Chiquibul, in the Chiquibul National Park even.
Yes.
In the volcanic areas of the Maya Mountains. So in reality, it is not that the Chiquibul is completely actually locked. So gold has been experimented, has been extracted, and up until today, there's a company. But the Guatemalans, the way how they operate is that, whilst the Belizean company is operating during the day, and the Guatemalans actually took and would take over at night in terms of their activities. And so we know that in order really to deal with the problem, we have really to adapt ourselves as well. And ourselves meaning Belize and the regulatory agencies, we have to look at a new strategy. And to do that, it means that we really have to engage at night. If we really want to be effective. We also have to be as highly determined as what it will take, just as how Guatemalans are able to do it, to climb into those higher elevations.
Currently, what are the particular mechanisms in place for the nighttime activity? Does the FCD have a patrol that goes out at night? I know you do joint patrol with the BDF. Is the BDF out at night? What is happening on the ground during the nighttime?
On the ground, the last time that there was activities conducted in the late evenings, it was actually last year, around November of last year. There was even a report that came about of apprehending some of the gold panners in the area. But that was about it. It really is, and we have been discussing our protocols for quite some years also on what type of protocols we need really to do or to develop and implement. Now, those protocols have still not really been finalized, even though we have been discussing this for quite so many years, in terms of how to really change the tactics, how to be able to engage in the evenings or at night if possible, without, and trying really to lessen as best as possible any level of confrontation. I can fully understand that Belize does not really want to engage in terms of having
any kind of conflict.
Any kind of conflict.
Yeah.
So we certainly understand that, but we have also to understand that these guys, that the Guatemalans, are not really stopping, and so we need really to find another kind of solution to this.
Well, they're outsmarting the system. If they know there are no patrols at night, then that is the ideal time for them to be able to access these areas. Now, gold panning comes with its very specific challenges, and what you have spoken about before in terms of illegal logging and the impact on the forestry was a great environmental concern. But gold panning does, in fact, have a very concerning impact on the environment through the waterways. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and I think that's what is more worrisome, that they are throwing a lot of garbage in the water, and they use the waterways also as a toilet. So fecal coliforms and bacteria and sediments, and of course while they are doing the gold panning, they have to remove rocks and trees. So this is changing the water regime, the quality of the water, which I think is it's probably a bigger concern than, you know, the goal itself, you know.
The extraction of the resources.
because some of these things are irreversible, you know, the destruction of the waterways themselves, you know. So that's what we really concerned.
Within the Chiquibul forest, do these various waterways gather or collect in one particular reservoir? And if that is the case, all of these pollutants, if I may, drain into this one particular area where we're drawing our water sources from, correct?
Yeah, the Belize River, the Greater Belize River Basin, it's in Belize. It's the largest watershed, right? Of course, Rio Hondo is a much larger watershed, but it's not in Belize, right? Rio Hondo has only like about 10% in Belize, and the majority is in Mexico and Guatemala. But the biggest in Belize is the Greater Belize River Basin. 30% is in Guatemala, and the majority, 70%, the majority is in the Cayo district in the Chiquibul forest. So when you're at the 1,000-foot fall, when you're at Rio On, the Chiquibul River or the Macal River, all the dams, the Chalillo, the Moyo, all of those are part of the water system, of the watershed. So the South Chiquibul River, you know, has the Ceibo Chico River, the Ceibo Grande, and other, you know, number of tributaries that come into these waterways here. Now this, the Ceibo Chico and Ceibo Grande, they are the very top. They are first order streams, and that's where the volcanics are. So that's the headwater. So if you are polluting, destroying the top, then
everything trickles
downstream is being contaminated, no? So so that's the main channel is the Belize River. So whatever comes down the Belize River from Benque, you know, down San Ignacio, Socots, all the villages, everyone uses the same waterway. Yeah.
From a legal perspective, in terms of any arrests of these individuals who are conducting this illegal activity within the Chiquibul, what takes place? I know they're extracted from the area, they're brought to the San Ignacio police station, they're charged. But when you look at the lasting effects of gold panning and chatay harvesting and all these other activities within the national park versus the punishment or the penalties that come along with it, what is your opinion? Does one outweigh the other?
I think that, last year the regulations were basically improved in terms of trying really to hit as hard as possible against illicit activities, environmental illicit activities. However, how to bring really the evidence as fresh and as good, as comprehensive is also another issue. In the past, the Guatemalans, traditionally when brought into the police station, into court, they basically would normally go for a guilty in a situation, but today they would plead as not guilty in many cases, which means that we have to be very solid in terms of really bringing the true evidence against them. Now, one of the easy ways that has been done for quite some time is in terms of illegal entry, where the immigration department comes in and we charge them, but that is really a low scale in terms of a fine. We are looking at $500 or $1,000 probably as the maximum. So people would normally come in and pay, and they actually go free almost instantly. So the evidence collection is one of the things that we have started really to realize that we have to be much more better at it. Now, who does that? In reality, that's another question. You know, who is going to do that on the ground? It should be the police department, basically, that is attached to the unit. But if there's no police officers around, then who is going to do that? Which actually poses another question on who is going to be effective in doing that. So we always would see a lot of the loopholes in the system. You know, we have come about with a recommendation for the last 3 years, of Belize really going to develop an environmental police, which would serve the country at large, only to deal with environmental issues. Because you see, in many cases, we would have to bring about 4 or 5 institutions together really to put in the charges on an individual. And that becomes very, very complex. But if the police actually knows about the environmental law or the green laws, then we felt that that would be really the avenue really to make it much more effective. But however, that is still only as a recommendation from us. I don't think it really has been grabbed. Many countries in Mexico, Guatemala even, I mean, right very close to us in the Chordemencos, there is a DIPRONA or an environmental police that actually serves as that particular branch of the police that deals with environmental issues.
We often speak of the gravity of this situation in terms of incursions into the Chiquibul and the Columbia River Forest and all these other areas, protected areas. And I am behooved that we haven't really taken this recommendation and implemented it and bring it to life in terms of forming a unit or the department that deals specifically with that. Much the same we have a tourism police unit that deals particularly with tourists and what have you. I think it's high time that we do look into something like that seriously.
I think there have been a lot of recommendations that we actually have said over the many years, from one of the areas into the other one and like that. Now, I think the key question in terms of really, looking at the gamut of things occurring along the western border is that we do not have, as far as I know, we do not have an integrated, a comprehensive, border, management plan or action plan. So without that, we certainly are still only trying really to be reactive to many things.
Yes.
And of course, who is supposed to be doing that? It has to be the government of Belize. We come up with the data, and we come up with the information. We can recommend, we can advise. And so, of course, Marlene, we have been talking about illegal gold panning for quite some time.
Yeah.
We actually had also mentioned about the trend in terms of milpas that would move into cattle ranching and then also the narco ganaderia. We actually have been speaking this over the last 3 years also. And yet we are already seeing the trend is moving into that. And still, from our own perspective, we don't see that we are really being tactical and strategic in really putting all of these things together.
Now, Raphael, I think one of the things that FCD is always commended for is that you have no fear in raising the red flags, and you also do a very thorough assessment as to what the challenges are and how your very limited resources are being used to counter those type of activities. Gold panning, for example, was something that was introduced into the conversation several years ago. From what we're hearing from you now is that it is obviously of greater concern, and I read your report where you pointed out you can't even quantify the number of Guatemalans that are involved, but you can say that and you can say that they're accessing these areas at the very times that they know the patrol will not be in the area. So you come up with a formalized system as to how to patrol in these very remote areas in Ceibo Chico, but if you will leave by, let's say, 10 a.m., that gives a full day for them and beyond, because it's on a weekly basis, and beyond for them to be able to access the activities. What is your recommendation? And I can imagine it will include an increase in patrols, but what is your recommendation if the area is so large, your rangers can only patrol on foot, especially certain times, so there will always be gaps as to where the Guatemalans can come over and make use of the opportunity?
I think we have to be, in one word, we have to be much more determined in terms of taking hold of the land of Belize. In a statement, what I mean by that is that in many cases, it's not only the limited resources that is the lacking or basically the limited factor. It also will require the determination and the will to be able to make a change.
Yeah.
I think, and in fact, whenever we start to look at the landscape, even though Chiquibul is 43.5 kilometers in terms of the western border with Guatemala, if we have basically some 4 or 5 of the conservation posts, that basically is able to cover in terms of doing the patrols on the ground, if we really wanted to do it. It's not really a big territory. Belize is small. So it's not really like something that we could not really do, but we have to be better in coordinating, in planning, implementing, and then also evaluating also the processes over time.
From your experience, when a conservation post is set up, does that deter activity in that immediate area?
It actually does. In fact, Rio Blanco is a very good example. There's over 240 hectares that have been recovered in the area. We are looking at over 800 acres already recovered. In Valentin, you can see some already of the areas that are already actually returning back. However, the Guatemalans are still moving into other areas because they know that also we do not really have a constant ongoing patrols.
Let's get the map up so we can get some perspective with the conservation post, because once you take a look at that, you can very easily see where the gaps would be, and there are some posts that need to. All right, there we go. So let's talk about what we're seeing here. This isn't the conservation post, but.
You want to talk about?
Yeah.
Well, it's difficult on that map because
Yeah, that isn't.
I would have to really point my finger on where the area is. But that's a watershed map of the Chiquibul forest.
Yeah.
And there on that side, which would be my left, is the border.
Yes.
So along the borders where we have on the north, pretty much we have the Valentin CP, and the very north would be where the proposed Caballo CP is. And then on the south would be Rio Blanco.
Okay.
Yeah. And then where it says project area, that's where Ceibo Chico is.
Yes.
So that's a volcanic area.
Yes.
All this down part at the bottom is the volcanics.
So the gold panning activity is taking place along what areas?
Yeah, that's sort of restricted.
Yes.
But there is one thing, that I just keep thinking and thinking about, how do we get the government or the people to understand what we are talking about? I sometimes think that they just listen this thing and goes from one side to the side. The government, the people, the people themselves that are the not one blade of grass. Those people don't even have an idea of what they're talking about, I think.
Yeah.
Yet I try to use analogies of how can I paint this thing to you to understand. Say I'm in my house and I have a leak on the water pipe.
Yeah.
And I have a leak on the roof, and I have termites eating
Your floor.
my floor, whatever. If I don't take care of that, pretty soon I won't have a house, right? That is what's happening to us. But a minister, I don't see how a minister understands this thing, or a bank teller understands these things here. We don't, because we are just like a little, piece of dust, inside this big thing. We don't see it. We don't really see it. But that's why we have, from the people on the ground, way to the top, the CEOs and the minister himself. But if this thing does not go up and down, there's no strategy, there's no plan, nobody understands this thing here. We just around and around, and you take the paper today and you fold it, and that's it. I don't know if a minister understands what is the environment, right? What is the macroinvertebrates? What is fecal coliform? What is really happening on the ground? If this is not understood, we will never take any action, right? I mean, sometimes I feel like it has been left to FCD, sometimes, the FCD guys know. But FCD is not there to save, the border. We have the information and we present report after report after report, but nothing happens, right? Some people have even said, that it's not true, and we invite them, let's go and see it. Even some media houses have said, what FCD said is not true. Well, let's go out there and see it, right? But you won't be able to know anything if you are down here in Belize City. But we have to understand, that's why we go to school to learn these things here,
Okay. Very recently, while the OAS Secretary General was here, you guys accompanied him on a flyover of the area. And in terms of forming that understanding of what actually takes place, he had a first-hand view of either the deforestation or whatever activity that is taking place within that area. Can you speak to us briefly on that?
Yeah, it's a little bit unfortunate that, I mean, I think we had a wonderful opportunity in our hands. You know, we as the country police really to demonstrate and take whatsoever time really to fly him over into these areas, or perhaps even to take him on the ground, as how Guatemala did.
Yes.
Guatemala took him on the ground. You know, my counterparts, you know, Association Balam were really very much, you know, reassured. And actually to ensure that this guy was going to reach there and be able to walk into these communities. Now, here in Belize, it did not really happen as how much it could have been done.
This has been, and I want to take the moment to say that this has been a criticism that has been made about the visit of Secretary General Almagro, because where the Guatemalans took the opportunity to take him into neighborhoods, to take him along the border communities and meet with the people, interact with the people and see for himself the challenges that were there, accompanied by the foreign minister in Guatemala. In Belize, we opted for a flyover. And now Secretary General Almagro pointed out in his media statement that he did see the devastation. Raphael, do you believe that the impact would have been different had he been on the ground to see the specific damage?
I think in terms of the ground area of reaching there, it's not that easy, but it still can be done. And I think that's what Derek was alluding to. I mean, in order for you to understand, you really have to see these things as how they're really happening on the ground. So I think the flight, it took him, and in fact I was there, and I was invited to go, so I had opportunity at least really to you know, be able to highlight, you know, some of the sightings. But we were unable really to reach way down south to the area of Rio Blanco and South Cebada, where, I mean, that's where the hot spots really are. I would have, you know, basically, you know, recommended that, you know, regardless of, you know, I know the weather was not really that good, but I think that, you know, it would have been really, really great, really, to have him, you know, see the actual, you know, reality as how it's occurring along the western border. But nevertheless, I gathered that he still was able to see some of the footprinting, of the human footprinting and the movement of people coming into Belize. So I can only be able to, at the end, you know, feel hopeful that he was able to at least get a part of the picture on what really is occurring. But we did not really go as far as into the other areas. For example, we had wanted really to fly him over by the Ceibo Chico zone, where the gold paners are actually active. We had wanted really to land in one of the conservation posts, which practically I felt it could have been done in terms of either Valentin or Rio Blanco, in order for him really to get a good view on how it looks on the landscape. But, you know, that's what really occurred on the flight.
Now let's bring it back to the issue of recommendations, because that is a very important step that you try to take once you identify a problem. The gold panners, if we're to recap the problem, come in at the times when there are no patrols in the area, specifically at night. They assemble near the waterways. In other words, the river or creek passes through that area, they assemble in that area. They dig holes, they settle, they leave their garbage, they use the bathroom, and all of these things end up back in the waterway, coming right back down into our watersheds that feed everything that we use in the city. We have identified that lack of a presence of any patrol is part of the reason that it continues. What is your current recommendation? If somebody would step in at this point and say, FCD, what do you need for us to mitigate what is taking place? What would your direct recommendations be?
I think in terms of the gold panning activity, we have felt that one of the key issues, or one of the key recommendations, is of course to upgrade the access road, which is the Ceibo Chico road. The assumption there is that if the units are able to reach much more faster and more effective, perhaps they're going to feel much more optimistic and much more vibrant, you know, energetic of being able to climb those mountains. And so that road is being upgraded right now.
Okay.
It is reaching way up to the natural arch right now, and probably it has just passed the natural arch and heading up to Sewa Chico.
Okay.
So I would hope that with the upgrade of that road, at least for now, we can be able to venture to go much more farther into those zones. As a second recommendation, we have basically advised that we need really to do multi-day of the taskings up into those mountains. If we don't want to engage at any point at night, then we have to be almost there and on site, and Guatemalans will be there. From what we gather, there would probably be some 70 to 100 Guatemalans operating right now, and these guys are not stopping. And what they have done, in fact, I brought here, and I had mentioned before about the stones that they would carry.
Yeah.
So this is like the kind of the stones that they would break, and they would pulverize it, and they would take it also to their communities.
There's gold in there.
Yeah, well, you see flecks of shiny something. Yeah, and people, we don't appreciate what it is to pan for gold, and the sifting that takes place, the breaking down of the stones. And it has to be a viable industry because they keep on coming back.
Yes. It is a viable one, and so there's no doubt that. Well, actually, last year around November, there would probably had been about 300 Guatemalans operating up there in those mountains. And and we would basically feel that this is already organized, and so whenever they actually would extract it, the gold is put on vials like this.
Okay.
So these are the vials, and then they are able also to measure it, and they know like how much they are already taking up to their communities. So they actually have their own kind of scale.
They have their own rudimentary scale. Yeah.
Right. So so we get a lot of communities across from Guatemala now that are spreading more actually the word of coming into Belize of looking at the gold. Now, frankly, there have been also a lot of Belizeans who say, well, why don't we give it then to Belizeans? But mindful, these things occur in remote areas.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people have there have been other concessionaires in the past that have become bankrupt with these things. There have been big machines left in the Chiquibul. They never reached to these areas. We have had a couple of people like arriving by Tapir camp, at our first camp, and they actually believe that this thing is right there occurring. It's not there. This thing is extreme. The highest mountains of Belize, and so it's not really that easy. It's big investments on how really to put in any operations up there. But the Guatemalans actually use only rustic equipment and tools, and they work very, very, very hard in terms of extracting these things.
So you feel better road access and increased patrols and a shift in the times that you patrol, whether overnight or multiple times for the day.
That's correct. And then the other recommendation is really for us to be more highly coordinated with the regulatory agencies, including the mining unit, or particularly the mining unit, because it is them that eventually have to lay the charge.
Yeah.
And so whenever the people are brought in, the idea is then really that they can get a fine that really can deter them in terms of not doing these illicit activities.
Then I guess the other thing is that the government needs to invest in this thing here.
Yeah.
You have to have boots on the ground. There's no question about it. It's hard work. We've done it. I've done it. I've been there with the soldiers, and I praise them for the work that they do. But we have to go out there, because I like to use this analogy, and the last time I was explaining to the minister, if I have a mango tree, I have my mango trees 10 miles away from the city. I live here, and my mango trees are bearing fruits, and I'm not there, and there's no one there. Somebody's going to take my mangoes, right? So we've got to be there, and you don't need to fight nobody. That's why we are doing what we call our light force operations. But as long as you are there, people will respect. But once we are not there, there's just forest. They'll just come across. They'll cut the forest. They'll take the maca. They'll take anything. So what we have to do is we have to really define routes. We have to make a plan, and we need to go on the ground.
Yeah.
That's the job that we have to do. If we do that, if we continue to do that, and we have proven that even, last year in November, from October we started patrolling. October, November, December, January, February, 1 truck of the Chiquibul border. If you go right now, there's proven by the flights that we have done and by the satellite imagery and the BDF and the police with us. This area, the incursions are very low, right? Beyond those areas, of course, because there is no presence, no human presence, no governance from the Belize side, then of course they are going in there.
Yeah.
So it's logic, it's simple, right? But we have to invest, and some men have to do the hard work. That would be the rangers or the soldiers, whatever. But we have to be, planning this and giving the incentive, putting our budget, putting our people, putting the road if it's necessary, right?
So that is, and I think you have the information to prove it. The increased presence reduces the level of incursions within the specific area that you're working. Now, I want to take the opportunity, as we quickly run out of time, to focus on cattle ranching. And this has become an emerging issue that we've been discussing with implications far beyond illegal use of land. So Derek, let's talk about what we're seeing with cattle ranching.
Yeah, we have a series of pictures right now. We just, what we do aerial flights and we install cameras and we video everything, right? So there is no story invented here, right? The camera has the plane has a GPS and we know where we are flying.
Yeah.
And we'll video the entire border, right? Way up to Halacte, right? And if you fly way down to Dolores, the problem seems uncontrollable in those areas. I don't know what is happening there, or lands, or immigration, or who, right? But in the Chiquibul, what we have seen, and this is exactly how it happened in Laguna del Tigre National Park in Guatemala, and our counterparts told us, look, you better start to work on this right now, because in 5 years you will have this problem, and in 10 years you won't be able to control this problem.
Yeah.
And that is precisely what's happening in the Chiquibul. And we've been saying it, right? And we have the records.
No, we're not just talking about using illegal land.
No.
What are the ramifications?
Go ahead.
What happened is that the poor peasants, right? They are the victims of this story sometimes. They're the ones who are given a chainsaw and a machete and a file, and they are sent, right? And they're paid, to do this to cut the forest, and they plant their milpas, but then they are moved away, either by force or they pay the land to them, and then the cattle ranchers will come in. Cattle ranchers will establish, large tracts of pastures and clearings, and they are here to stay, right? They are investing. It's a turf. And these are the same guys who are talking about the narco ganaderia and whatever. They have their warugas. These guys with guns and all around. So I took special time to view all these videos, and I have some of the pictures here. Cattle ranching. When you are flying with the plane, the cattle are running all about the place. They're frightened. They're not used to. So like in this one here, in this case here, that is a fence that's being built. Right, you can see it right between the red lines. They are building more fences. We counted 11. I think it was pastures, and there is more than a dozen ponds. Right now, I think there is 10 houses. There is one you could see there. I call it dwellings, right? And they would range from families living there to just camps, right? But they are establishing themselves.
Now, not to miss one of the important points that you talk about, and we've seen the experience in Mexico, where cattle ranches in very remote areas like this become the hub for narcotic camps, and they're usually where many of the guns are stored. It's where a lot of the very dangerous people hide out, and that in fact is a very big part of the fear that you have if the cattle ranchers become more established in this area.
Yeah, I think that's why in Guatemala, particularly they formed the green battalions. And because it was military that have to deal with this kind of elements. We are no longer dealing with a poor campesino or a poor farmer. We are dealing more with organized groups. In the area of Guatemala, it's still an ongoing issue, even after so many years. Of Laguna del Tigre is still being taken, large trucks by cattle ranchers, or in terms of the people involved with drugs. And the point, as how Derek alluded, is that we basically already are seeing the trend.
Yeah.
And we know where this thing is going.
Yeah.
So in the flights that were taken, by Derek over the last, 3 to 4 months, we actually have been doing flights now from Vaca and way down to Colombia. Yeah. So we're able now really to document all of that area, which is over 80 kilometers of the western border of Belize. And what you see there is certainly, something that behooves us really to see that there's so much going on.
Yeah.
And that's why I come back again that we need an integrated, comprehensive plan for the western border. And why are we, of course, interested? Because these are really areas where protected areas are remaining. The Vaca Forest Reserve, the Chiquibul, the Caracol, and the Columbia River Forest Reserve. And these are actually, of course, big swaths of forest. And you're correct, because that really serves as a good haven for people who want to do illicit activities. So, and looking at the projections from Guatemala, we already know, how this thing is moving then into the eastern part and southern part of Petén, where there's a complete absence of the government of Guatemala, also in southern Petén. And then if we don't have also a rigorous program on our part, then certainly then it all creates a good environment for these things to occur.
Now, I have one more question I need to ask before we move on to our next segment. We know last year with the shooting of the miner in the Chiquibul, there was a large upset that was caused between the diplomatic relations between Belize and Guatemala, which adds to the sensitivity of the work that Friends for Conservation and Development does. Has there been any marked change in how patrols are conducted or how rangers are instructed to conduct their patrols, or even presence of BDF within that area since that incident?
We actually have been in more discussions now with the regulatory agencies in terms of trying to find out a manner and the development of the protocols. Now, the protocols are supposed to outline to us, very clearly the roles of each one of the organizations. We still have not really been able to finalize that as yet. So until today, we would still continue doing the work as before. Of course, being more cautious, of course, trying to reduce any level of tensions that can occur over there. Yeah. But one of the issues along that same line, though, is that whenever we start to look at cattle ranching, those occur, within the adjacency zone to a large extent. But the weight is going to be more beyond the adjacency zone. So now the question becomes then, who is going to be attending those within the adjacency zone, the 1 kilometer? Because if we don't really want to have any intensity of any activity in that area, then the question is, who is going to do it? How do we do it? And that is really, perhaps the big question right now to us on how are we going to do it whilst we are still reporting and bringing the data, bringing the photos, bringing the videos.
Yes.
And we already can demonstrate. So we have to do something. And that something has to be much more urgent more than ever before. Because what we are seeing here is really an advancement of something that is much more bigger than not even Guatemala has been able to contain it on their own territory. Yeah. So this is something that it should be able to teach us that the fact is not really to lay low. The fact is that we need really to be much more tactical. We need to be much more smart in terms of dealing with these issues.
Well, Raphael and Derek, we thank you once again for coming in and painting the picture to us as to what is actually taking place on the ground in Chiquibul. We appreciate the hard work that you do and appreciate that you are able to bring this information to us. So thank you. And we hope that the proper ears are listening to some of the concerns that you brought out this morning.
Certainly, thank you.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we are going to be talking to the president of the Christian Workers Union, looking at some of the commonly asked questions and concerns coming up from workers when it comes to labor laws. So that's coming up after the break.